Yeah. The improv group I was in, it was called Chuckle Sandwich. Part of me, like, since it's just a high school group, part of me wants to use that name for something in the future. Maybe if I'm in like a podcast, maybe if I start a podcast like this in the future or something.
What?
Part of the reason why I started Chuckle Sandwich was because with Schlatt and Charlie, I was like, okay, these are two people that I really enjoy making content with, and I want to get to know them better. So and in my past experience in working with them, they were always able to come through for like projects and stuff.
As the podcast comes to an end, closing January 7th, it makes me think who I am and who I was when I first discovered it. I first discovered Chuckle Sandwich on June 20th with the release of episode 20. Now I know, as early as I was the Little Weekly Slap, back then it took me a bit to realize Chuckle Sandwich has been going on for 6 months already before I discovered it. But as I watched episode 20, when they talked about favorite puppy, and they were calling Ted a crazy person and to stay 6 feet away from a gun at all times, that was the funniest shit I've ever heard in my life.
And I brought favorite puppy with me, and it felt. Isn't that weird to say?
It's really weird to say favorite puppy.
Isn't that weird?
I brought favorite puppy with me. We're gonna make sure you can't get within like 30 feet of a gun now.
Yeah, you
I
think
don't
so?
know how I lost favorite
basically,
puppy.
So after that episode, I'm pretty sure I started from episode 1 all the way up to 20 because that's like all the episodes that were out at that time. And I fell in love with it. Still, my favorite episode is probably episode 2 or episode 5. And episode 2 is hilarious because Schlatt makes himself seem like a hero after being late to the podcast. And then episode 5, it shows... Schlatt talks about how he arrived in Texas on the night of like the worst snowstorm they've ever received in Texas, and that was so funny, especially the McDonald's story. That I love that episode. Now, having over 600 hours on this podcast, and yes, you did hear that right, 600 hours. It's kind of fucking insane. It kind of corrupts your vocabulary, and here are some things I quote almost daily.
I'd get her pissed the fuck off.
You know, they're walking
what are all
around.
these liberals doing?
Where they brought a bunch of helicopters and they dropped a dome over Springfield.
I agree. We should do that to Texas. How about Chunger? How are we feeling
Did you say Chunger?
You don't give a shit about the fractions.
story
Shut the
of my
fuck
life,
up about the fractions. It's really small. You gotta understand how small this is. It's minuscule.
Fellas, you ever been shaving your nuts and then it's like, ow, I cut them.
Oh, I do, but I do all the time. I'm all blood. I'm all blood below the dick. It's
Well, lucky for you. What the?
There are 3 stages of Chuckle Sandwich. This is the industrial Chuckolution, when it was Charlie, Ted, and Schlatt talking about little funny things like, would you rather be a woman or a lizard? But then we have the Dark Ages up next, where it was just Schlatt and Ted doing podcasts with Wilbur Soot and Slagger Souls for the 60th time. We have the longest stage in the current one, which is Ted, Schlatt, and Tucker. I think this is one of the best. I think one of my favorite episodes is the one where Schlatt's in Japan and they talk about first or worst. That's one of my favorite episodes, and that's from this one, so it's pretty good in my opinion. Now, the podcast was better back in the day. I will agree. You don't have Charlie's little funny bits. Like, yeah, we should put Texas in a huge dome, and like those kind of jokes. Believe it or not, Chuckle Sandwiches actually helped me a lot in talking to people, because when I have nothing to say, I'll just spit out a random quote I have from the podcast, or if even anything comes on in a conversation with a topic or context, I can include a Chuckle Sandwich bit. I will. I don't have any right now because there's no context in this. There's no conversation happening. You're not talking back to me. But if there was, you'd probably hear some stupid shit like unlimited bacon, but no games, but no bacon. Fucking whatever the question is. He stole it anyway. And speaking on Machinima Inbox, why are you so stupid? My experiences with podcasts before this one. Before I found this podcast, I think I was in 7th grade under. And I'm pretty sure the only podcast I've ever watched was Impulsive, because Logan Paul was like the shit back then. I mean, look at this thing. It's sick. I wore this all the time. Logan Paul was the shit back then. I mean, his fucking vlogs where he went, "What's up, Logan? What's pop?" like that shit was tough to me when I was in 4th grade. Now when I look back on those, they're kind of fucking stupid. But this isn't about Logan Paul. This is about Chuckle Sandwich. I've talked about my favorite episodes. I've talked about who I was when I discovered it, what podcast and how it got me into podcasts in the first place. I've talked about my favorite bits and how I repeat them every single day. But I want to expand on some other episodes that I really like, that are my favorite. For YouTube advice, my favorite episodes are probably the Mr. Sark episode or the Freddie Wong episode because, one, they're two talented YouTube legends who have paved their way through skit comedy and After Effects and shit like that. My most favorite episodes for comedy is probably the drunk episodes. We gave drunk life advice one that's hilarious, and the other just a drunk episode. Those are the funniest pieces of fucking internet video of all time. I love it so much. Now, the last couple episodes I want to talk about are coping episodes from being sad or just having a rough day. I want to end my night off with a good one. I've talked about this episode before in this video, episode 5. I love episode 5 because it makes me think of hard times I've had listening to Schlatt talk about his move to Texas and how fucking awful it was. One, it's hilarious. 2, it's like, damn, if I was in that situation, I'd hate being in that situation as well. And 3, it's nostalgic because I remember watching it a long ass time ago, so it's nice to look back on it every now and then. I love this episode so much. It's the McDonald's story, like I said. It's the most hilarious shit I've ever listened to. The Void Dome, or that one bit where Charlie goes, I don't know how to do it, but if you've seen that episode, you know what I'm talking about. Now, this podcast has helped me during dark times with anxiety and shit, but I don't want to make this a sentimental video. I want to make this video a way to remember what Chuckle Sandwich was and who I was watching the show and how I've grown up from 7th grade with no confidence to who I am now, quoting the shit every day. This is my favorite podcast, probably my favorite piece of media ever, other than the Goopcast podcast, because that's what I grew up first with, and I love the Goopcast podcast. If you ever watch this, please team up with fucking C Scoop again or Travis. Those guys are amazing, and I feel like if you guys can combine little LC reunion, except not fully, that'll be amazing. But I've grown a lot with this podcast. Everyone around me knows it. My dad knows it. I talk to him about this podcast every single day. I'm really sad that it's ending, but I want to end this on a positive note. Thank you, Chuckle Sandwich, for being a part of my life, and I'm not going to make this drawn out. This is the end of this 7-minute video, so thank you for watching, and this is a tribute to Chuckle Sandwich.